Welcome to Wondertalk episode number 33, where we talk about my Sith Inquisitor's backstory, story, and roleplay and history. I'm very excited to be talking with you guys again because last episode we talked about Javiik's father, my Sith Inquisitor's father, Rythan, and his time on the planet of Dathomir during the Battle of Dathomir. And what happened last time was you guys told me about what the horrifying things he would have encountered on that planet could have been, and eventually he returned home to his family, to find his family missing. Now, on this episode, I had asked you guys about what do you think happened next? Basically, he returned home and his family was missing, and he was told, you're going to be redeployed back to Dathomir. We need you back on the front lines. And you guys were absolutely great. You left me lots of comments about how you think he would have reacted to this, whether or not he would have gone to Dathomir for a second time after the terrible things that he saw there the first time around, and how that would have affected his spirit. So if you're not familiar with this series yet, part of it is creating Javiik's story outside of what's presented by the main game, and you guys actually get to be involved. These are all comments left by you guys. So Pessimist said, I'm not sure if this would have any significance, but I think it'd be interesting if Javiik's father was afraid of Sith assassins in particular. It would make sense since the assassins would be able to use Dathomir's environment to their advantage, cloaking themselves in darkness and striking brutally from the shadows. And Pessimist is absolutely right. It really makes sense that the Sith that Rythan might have encountered on Dathomir were especially Sith assassins, Sith Inquisitors, because of the kind of shadow attacks and kind of psychological torture that they really engaged in our last Wondertalk. They are not Sith warriors. They did not attack up front and personal. And what I decided to do was, although Javiik is not a Sith assassin, he probably would have made a pretty cool one, I decided to incorporate the Inquisitor into this story that we're going to talk about after we're done with the comments. So for our Wondertalk and our actual playthrough of the story, they're a bit out of step now, and we're going to be talking about Javiik meeting his father on Tatooine. This is going to happen eventually. It has been decided and foretold. But in the actual story in the game, we've finally left Tatooine. We're on Alderaan. So Shadow Architect actually had an idea for Javiik to go back. An idea for if Javiik went back to Tatooine would be Darth Azash mentioning something of significance, vague as always, was in a Republic outpost and he would meet his father as squad leader. So we do have to kind of have some type of idea about whether we'll pretend that Javiik has not left Tatooine for a story yet, or if we need to make up another reason for him to return to Tatooine. We actually will eventually return to Tatooine for the bonus series, but at the moment, we're technically not there in the story. And that's one of the cool things about roleplay. You really get to decide what's going on. If you want to retcon something, if you want to change something, if you want to switch the timeline up, if you want to do things that don't really make sense in the game but make sense in your character's story, go for it. Have fun. Don't worry about making things perfectly line up with what's going on in SWTOR's story. William Spears had a quick comment about deployment. Troop deployment is often haphazard. Troops trained and equipped to fight in one place often find themselves rerouted to another. Sometimes it's a relief, other times it's just a different nightmare. In this specific case, Javiik's father is being rerouted again to the same place he was before, but it could have gone the total opposite way and he could have wound up on Alderaan or one of the other many planets that were besieged during the Galactic War. Wrath and Flame thinks that Javiik's father would return to Dathomir. Well, in my opinion, Javiik's father wouldn't have been very happy about learning that he would be going back to Dathomir. However, exactly because he still has hope for the Republic and its ultimate goal, freedom and peace in the galaxy, I believe he would even half-heartedly agree to return to that front. From there, I'm not sure how things would go, but a cool idea would be that he could be captured by the Sith during one of the battles, and then, as an Imperial War prisoner, he could go through some quite terrible experiences or just be locked up for quite some time, like a couple years. After that, he could potentially get the chance to escape during a prisoner transfer operation. So while in an Imperial battlecruiser, a Republic surprise attack could take place just above Tatooine, and amidst the chaos he could find an opening and get out of the ship using an escape pod, which would eventually take him to Tatooine's surface. And I will be stealing some of the end of that story for Rythan's true story. Benjamin Winnicky decided to tag on to Wrath and Flame's comment saying, When he is in the escape pod, he crash lands on Tatooine. He goes mad under the heat of the twin suns. So when he sees Javiik, he barely remembers him. And I think Javik's father is definitely going to have been through some psychological troubles as well as some hard-to-sun weathering by the time Javiik eventually gets to him. Jack had some really nice comments about how Javik's father would have changed over time. Jack said, "Rythan is repulsed by war. He doesn't defect. He quit. Not trusting anymore the rebellion, too many casualties, lack of organization, and he blames them for failing to protect his family. He feels betrayed. He starts his quest to find his family, while making a deal to buy a spaceship and leave Alderaan. Something goes wrong, and he has to kill a man for self-defense, then escapes with the ship. He decides to hide on Tatooine. He is a hurt man. He can't believe he murdered someone. He went from a war hero to a fugitive. Life can be unfair. He even doesn't know if there is a holotape to prove his innocence. He meets Javiik on one of the lowest moments of his life. This is why he doesn't judge Javiik. He finally has his son at least." I think I really like the idea that this moment between Javiik and his father could be a really happy moment, a really coming home moment. And I really like the idea of Javik's father going from this truly honorable man to something that's not quite honorable anymore, very far from it in fact. Darth Harbinger had some really good ideas about why Javik's father might have chosen Tatooine. Sometimes it's kind of fun to choose the destination before you choose the reason. In most cases, in a real story, a character would have a problem that they need to solve. For example, Javik's father needs to get away, and then you would pick the destination. Javik's father wants to get away, so he chooses Tatooine. In this case, we picked Tatooine first, and then we're just filling in the blanks as we go along. So Darth Harbinger said, "I think maybe Javik's father had enough of the Republic military after the renewed Battle of Dathomir and decided to off to Tatooine to settle down. With his notoriety as a decorated war hero, I figure he would settle there for anonymity's sake, so that the Republic wouldn't bother him and the Empire wouldn't hunt him down, living off the rest of his days on a quiet moisture farm while hoping his family is safe somewhere." And I think you're absolutely right. Tatooine is perfect for both of those reasons. And UUSS had the idea that Rythan could really pass down his experience. UUSS said, "Javik's father went back to Dathomir and had a much easier time than the new soldiers. He gave some of them tips to survive. Furthermore, he saw most of these men butchered at the hands of the Sith. Javik's father was broken by this and fled, eventually ended up on Tatooine. When Javiik finds him, he is a broken man. Javiik will have to decide whether to put his father down whilst remaining ignored or to reconcile and learn the truths of war." Man, that is going to be a difficult reunion. We did talk about the idea that Javik's father didn't want to talk about the war to his son. He didn't want to talk about the Battle of Alderaan. And there's absolutely no way that his father is going to easily talk about what happened to him on Dathomir as well. And Anna Sumner really thinks that the helpful, kind, willing to help rebuild person is not going to be lost in Rythan even after everything he's been through. So Anna Sumner said, "I feel that after Rythan found out that his family was missing, and he received word that the fighting on Dathomir was to begin anew, he deserted the Republic military and began searching for his family. He thinks the best way to do that is to assist other Cathar, maybe refugees of war. Perhaps he ended up on Nar Shaddaa helping the refugee camps and trying to keep them away from the Hutt's greedy grasps. Maybe he finds himself on Tatooine to help more Cathar in need, or maybe details of the Battle of Dathomir come out and the Republic is searching for him again." And that could be kind of scary, because if Rythan is indeed a deserter, the Republic's kind of busy right now, but eventually they're going to want to deal with him, I assume. Alexander also thinks that Rythan is out there helping someone. Alexander said, "I don't know why Javik's father would be on Tatooine, but if he's there, he could certainly be helping the locals to defend themselves from the Geonosians and Sand People. There's even a quest on Pubside bonus series about training local mercenaries to fight Sand People. Or maybe he helps moisture farmers get by and trying to make life on Tatooine be less harsh on the people. Like some former soldiers end up joining a relief group after they retire." And I think both of you are really right. I can't see Rythan's father really just sitting idly by for years and years without doing anything. He's gonna be out there on Tatooine, probably helping someone. Maybe he's a lot quieter and a lot less involved than he would have been, but you know Rythan's gonna have the back of the local people. Adam Lizard had some really interesting ideas about how Javik's father may have deserted and wrote a really nice little story to go with it. So here's what a damn lizard said. I believe that Rythan, having already joined the Republic military, had no choice in his involvement in the renewed conflict on Dathomir. Wars are bloody and terrible, but most important to the Republic, they are costly, and they cannot afford to let troopers go without good reason. Unfortunately for Rythan, he could not provide a satisfactory excuse to avoid any more time in the poisonous, red-tinged battlefield that awaited him. So I'm going to pause right there. I think that's absolutely right. I think, obviously, Rythan's first motive would be, my family is missing, I must go find them. But that's probably not a good enough of an excuse for the Republic military to simply let him leave when he is so incredibly needed on Dathomir, especially because he is now an experienced soldier and the conflict has kind of sprung up out of nowhere and he's really, really needed. So a damn lizard went on to say, his first campaign on Dathomir had left him with more than a few scars, but the second was nearly enough to snuff out the flame that burned within him entirely. It wasn't long before he could feel the fighting taking its toll on him, and he knew that one way or another he'd die if he stayed. Unsurprisingly, others shared his sentiment and with heavy hearts began to craft a plan to desert their comrades and flee the planet. They spent days waiting for the right moment to flee, but as a Sith bomber squadron began their run, they found the distraction they had been aching for. Using the chaos and destruction wrought by the first wave of bombings, Rythan and his band of traitors began their race towards a docked supply shuttle. But the hope swelling in their chests quickly turned into raw adrenaline as a blaster bolt tears through Rythan's shoulder pad, grazing his shoulder. Looking up from his wound, barely registering the pain, he sees his commanding officer aiming a blaster at him. Fellow soldiers racing to their CO's aid. Rythan and the other deserters kept running, shots sanding out through the fading explosions. By the time Rythan reached the shuttle and got it off the ground, there was barely anyone left alive. A dozen friends lost in mere seconds, a statistic he and the survivors had plenty of time to ponder during the long jump to Tatooine. It only took a few days of laying low before the band of deserters began to go their separate ways, all pretending that it was out of strategy rather than regret. Truth is, just being around each other provoked an unbearable guilt in them, and reminded them of the horrors they bore witness to in their campaigns. Eventually, Rythan ended up working on a moisture farm for an aging denizen of the inhospitable desert world, helping to keep the various machines around the lonely plot of land up and running. The work was hard, and the pay was meager, but it filled Rythan with a spark of hope. He was free. No more violence, no more death, no more orders. All that stood between Rythan and his family was the passage of time. All he has to do now is wait, and one day, when he has enough credits, he can watch the twin sun set from a light year away. That was such a great read. That had so many awesome elements. I'm definitely going to be working many of them into Rythan's story. And Giant Suck also wrote a really cool story. I'm not going to use a lot of the elements, but I think it would make like a really awesome movie, kind of like Rogue One or something like that. I would definitely watch it. So here's Giant Suck's story. Challenged by the disappearance of his family and new assignment to Dathomir, Rythan stayed a few weeks wandering the woods near his home, until one day an old friend from the time in service to House Olgo and now captain in the Republic Army confronted him. After a long argument, Rythan agreed to go to Dathomir, but during the journey he kept thinking about his family. The Republic troop escort upon which Rythan's battalion traveled was attacked by an Imperial flotilla of the planet Wayland. Wayland, that's a very familiar name. Just a second, I need to go look that up. Oh my god, there is so much cool stuff associated to the planet of Wayland. Definitely go look that one up on your own, because I don't think I could summarize it very well. Giant goes on with his story. The Tharanta-class corvette housing Rythan was badly damaged by the barrages of ion cannons from an Imperial harrower, and Rythan managed to get on board one of the escape pods. Rythan and 5 other people in the pod saw the Republic ships torn to space debris and flame. As they entered Wayland's atmosphere, none said a word. The pod took ground in a dense jungle, crashing through branches until finally burrowing in the soft ground. All knocked unconscious by the violent landing, the survivors woke up to the loud bashing of war clubs upon the hull of the pod. Unaware they had met one of the planet's native inhabitants, the Poseidons, Rythan, being the only veteran aboard, tried to calm the nervous recruits and decided to stay inside the pod until nighttime. When night came, the survivors packed the few supplies the pod had to offer and entered into the wilderness. They saw no Poseidons, and thanks to the many stars littering the sky, they made it to a small glade. There they ate some rations and waited for dawn. When morning came, the jungle buzzed with noise from its many denizens, and upon the horizon they could see a hill. Rythan decided they should make for the hill to get a better view of their surroundings. At first, the trek through the thick vegetation was exciting. They still had rations, and despite their traumatic experience, they were alive. But soon the real face of the jungle showed, when Yalora, a young recruit from Lavish Commoner, was strangled by a long, scaly creature dropping from one of the branches above. It was confirmed by Recruit Pharaoh to be a vine snake similar to those he had seen when visiting Kashyyyk. With the unexpected loss of Yalora, the morale ran low, and Rythan had a hard time keeping the group together, becoming disillusioned himself thinking about his missing family. I like to think that in some alternate reality, this is exactly what happened to Rythan's father. Instead of going to Tatooine, he went to Wayland, and this crazy story happened instead. I really like it. And now that we have gone through all of your guys' comments, you guys have all contributed to Javiik's story and to Rythan's story. This is what happened on Rythan's return to Dathomir. After hearing he was to return to the hell that was Dathomir, Javiik's young father Rythan half-heartedly agreed to return to the front lines after finding his family missing. His request to take longer leave to find his family fell on deaf ears, as the Republic could not afford to lose even one soldier in the bloody war against the Sith Empire. He turned to an old friend from the time in service to House Ulgo for advice. After a long argument, Rythan agreed to go to Dathomir, but during the journey he kept thinking about his family. Darth Arctis had brought new horrors to Dathomir, and the treacherous landscape had not changed. This time, though, Rythan had become an expert of the planet's deadly forests, and was able to both lead his squad safely through the terrain and also avoid the beasts and dangers that lurked in the darkness of Dathomir. While he could keep his squad mates and newfound brothers and sisters in arms safe from their environment, he could not protect them from the terrifying attacks made by the Sith assassins and sorcerers sent by Darth Arctis in the night. During one of these shadow attacks, Rythan awoke to the screaming of his squad mates. Instead of attacking directly, this night their enemies had truly used the landscape to their advantage. The squad had settled down on damp swampland, and Darth Arctis' Sith sent Sith lightning into the wet ground, allowing it to travel to the sleeping soldiers without ever being within blaster range. Sick laughter filled the air as soldiers awoke to electrocution, and only a few of the Republic's soldiers survived the attack long enough to chase the Sith back to the shadows. Repulsed by the brutality of the Sith and the helplessness of their squad against enemies they could not even see, Rythan knew any more time on the poisonous, red-tinged battlefield would kill him. He could feel the fighting and the butchering of his fellow soldiers taking its toll on him, and he knew that one way or another he'd die if he stayed on the planet. Unsurprisingly, others shared his sentiment and with heavy hearts began to craft a plan to desert their comrades and flee the planet. Very few of the soldiers had survived the night's attack, and all their communication systems had gone down from the lightning. They spent days waiting for the right moment to flee, but as the Sith bomber squadron began their run, they found the distraction they had been aching for. Using the chaos and destruction wrought by the first wave of bombings, Rythan and his band of traitors began their race towards a docked supply shuttle. Their escape was simple. No one was watching the supply shuttles when so much destruction was happening elsewhere. Rythan, being the only veteran aboard, calmed down the nervous soldiers and directed them to leave the planet and make the jump to hyperspace. Unknown to the soldiers, they were not alone in the ship. A young recruit from Lavish Planet of Commoner was sleeping in the ship's berth. Although exhaustion had kept her from waking during the soldiers' boarding, the ship's jump to hyperspace woke her from her deep sleep. Racing to the cockpit, she was surprised to find Rythan and two other soldiers handling the ship's controls. She knew immediately what they were doing and what they were: deserters. Assuming there was only 3 soldiers in the ship, she launched herself furiously at Rythan, who was sitting in the pilot's seat watching the controls. She pulled a utility knife from her belt, screaming as she attacked him. In their surprise, she succeeded in her attack, her knife tearing through Rythan's shoulder pad, grazing his shoulder. As he cried out, he reactively grabbed for her and slammed her head against the console. Not knowing she was also a soldier of the Republic, Rythan's forceful blow had been strong enough to kill her on the spot. Shocked and horrified, Javiik's father immediately stood up and left the room. Her body was thrown at the airlock by the other soldiers, and they moved on with their plan to escape. He had gone from a war hero to a fugitive, a father to a murderer. Rythan felt his will to search for his family leave him, and all he craved was to be alone. The ship's maps led to many planets, and Rythan chose Tatooine to land on, a remote planet he'd heard was largely ignored by the rest of the galaxy. Dissent spread through the deserters. It was clear, even from space, that the planet was barren of life, and that there would be no forests or mountains to hide in. Rythan and the other deserters argued, but in the end they outnumbered him, and he realized that no matter what the best course of action was, they would want to soon return to normal, civilized life. During the night, he stole himself away on the ship's escape pod and crashed into the desert of Tatooine. No more violence, no more death, no more orders. He was free.